When we examine AI's cultural impact, it's critical to include Indigenous voices. I'm joining you today from Treaty 1 territory on Turtle Island. The province of Manitoba is home to the Anishinaabe, Dakota, Innu, Anishinaabe, Dene, and Métis nations, and is on the traditional trade and travel routes of the Inuit. These groups are culturally distinct, but certain key worldview elements are often shared and have been put into a pan-indigeneity. Indigenous scholars and those thinking about AI argue that AI has to reflect these values like kinship, reciprocity, and local sovereignty. Without these, AI risks not only misrepresenting Indigenous stories and histories, but also flattening the rich diversity of distinct nations into a generic Indigenous label. Because AI systems rely on fragmented and often biased datasets, they tend to reduce the complexity of Indigenous identities. The over-reliance on oversimplified proxies means that distinct cultural narratives are erased. As noted in the Indigenous Protocol in an AI paper edited by Lewis, this is not a unified stance. Pan-indigeneity flattens the rich texture and variability of Indigenous thought, indeed all of our thought. Without nuance or context, AI's training data perpetuates stereotypes, misappropriates knowledge, and limits access to resources. In this program, I actually had a chance to see this firsthand. Last semester, I took a course on indigeneity and technology. As part of the class, we generated abstracts, we curated resource lists, and we even used various generative AI tools to create images. My focus was on how AI might support language revitalization in Indigenous communities, local to what I call Manitoba, specifically among the Innu, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and Dakota communities. But what I found was striking. The AI didn't seem to understand what Manitoba really was, or who these groups of people were. The landscapes it generated looked nothing like our local terrain. The regalia or clothing depicted was irrelevant to the cultural groups I was studying. And even the names and categories used by the AI often missed the mark. When it produced papers or summaries, they rarely reflected the realities, histories, or voices from this region. And that's a big deal because indigeneity is deeply tied to place. When AI ignores the specific lands, languages, and cultures of a place like Manitoba, it risks turning everything into a vague, pan-Indigenous blur. For those of us using these tools in education, especially I think people in the humanities and social sciences, this disconnect can be dangerous. If our students are using it for research, it reproduces erasure even as it appears to be very authoritative. Now, the issue runs deeper than just inaccurate outputs. The way AI scrapes data, text, images, and stories often happens without community consent and pulling from colonial data. This form of data extraction is a new kind of digital colonialism. As Dr. David Gartner from UBC puts it, land stolen from Indigenous peoples is now home to data centers that house stolen Indigenous data. AI models trained on such material mirror long-standing patterns of exploitation, removing knowledge from its context and redistributing it at scale. Arthur Pachawis further warns us that AI isn't about some rogue superintelligence going Skynet.
Skynet has become self-aware.
He explains that, in fact, that's not what he's actually worried about. What he's worried about is, and I quote, "I am worried about anonymous hyperintelligences working for governments and corporations." Pachawis challenges us not only to recognize these oppressive tendencies, but also to reimagine our relationship with technology. In his call to make kin with the machines, he reminds us that we can and must engage with AI in ways that honor our relationships, our cultural integrity, and our community control, rather than simply reinforcing systems of domination. He suggests an Indigenous-owned and created technology, an AI that is imbued with sacred knowledge, but controlled by those communities, that understands the language and sees the world in a different way and sees it as kin that could be used to help reinvigorate Indigenous communities. This is a beautiful vision and something that I think is heavily worth considering. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. It's a beautiful possibility. The concerns that do exist are magnified when AI lacks the nuance and context needed to represent Indigenous stories, histories, and politics. When Indigenous knowledge is scraped without consent from a different frame, it risks misrepresentation and appropriation. The reliance on biased datasets and oversimplified proxies encourages stereotypes, increases disparities, and ultimately limits access to resources. But there is another path forward. Vine Deloria Jr. offers a framework for AI ethics grounded in cultural integrity, self-determination, and non-interference. Principles that remind us true sovereignty includes control over how communities are represented and how their data is used. Indigenous thinkers also recognize possibilities in technology if it's built with consent, cultural care, and true collaboration. AI has the potential to repatriate knowledge and foster vibrant connections between data, stories, place, and people. But if it isn't done right, we risk perpetuating digital colonialism and erasing the diverse tapestry of Indigenous life. If AI is going to play a role in our shared future, we need systems that don't just generate content, they must listen, respect, and be respected, reflect and be reflected on the deep ties between culture and land. Otherwise, we're not innovating, we're just repeating the past in digital form.